Hey, it's Drybear. A brand new loot filter system has gone into the First Descendant, and anytime a system like this goes into games, it's going to confuse a lot of players based on the logic that's put in with it. A lot of people have been asking, and so today I'm going to go through the loot filter system and how you can get the most out of it in the First Descendant Season 1. So, in this game, the main thing we're looking at here is going to be equipment that drops. You have 3 different kinds of equipment that will drop when you're playing the First Descendant. You have your weapons, which have their own section here, and you can tab over to your reactors, which is going to have its own section here, and lastly, your external components, which is going to have your own section here. However, the inventory for all of those is shared. It's just equipment slots that you have to slot these through. Previously, we have had a button, and on PC it is Shift. I don't know what it is on console, but you can, if you have excess in here, you can hold Shift and it will mark things that are basically lower than ultimate as junk. What happens when you mark as junk is you can junk this, it'll have the trash icon on top of it, and then you can dismantle it by holding Control on PC, and it gets rid of it and dismantles it. In this patch for Season 1, what they did is they added in a brand new loot filter. This doesn't auto-mark things, this doesn't auto-dismantle things. All this does is give you some knobs and dials to turn for that shift button, for the mark all, designate all as junk. This shift button is all you're controlling with this filtration system. So what this does, if you've never used one of these before, is it says anything that equals the stats you're putting on here or is below them will be marked as junk. But there are some conflicting, like order of priority systems in this that you'll have to understand. So let's start at the very simplest, which is going to be weapons, which is this here. By default, this is kind of what it was doing already, is that if it has a rare tier or lower, which means that if you have any weapons that aren't marked as favorite, that are purple quality or lower, when you hold shift, it will mark all of those as junk and leave anything that is ultimate alone. So you can play around with this and get some very specific results depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So again, in this case, we want to exclude any weapon that has a enhanced unique ability. So that way, even if, like, say, if I have this, right? So if I have, like, my Afterglow sword is maxed out right now. If I unfavorite it, by the way, if you favorite anything, it will always be excluded from loot filters. You don't have to worry about that. So if you wanted to, you can unfavorite these or favorite them. And they did add in new symbols. So if you favorite multiple times, it'll cycle through all of those symbols. They have like the 4 playing card symbols and then A, B, C, D if you want to have that in there, or just the normal heart. But you can see that this Afterglow sword is not marked as favorite, so it should be available for the filter. Let's do this as ultimate tier below, which meets that criteria. But we have exclude weapons with enhanced unique ability. So when I go like this, it will mark the 2 purples as junk, but it doesn't mark the Afterglow sword because it has an enhanced unique ability, which we have decided to exclude from that process. In general, for weapons, I think you can just leave this as is, rare tier and lower, level 100 and lower, and exclude all weapons that have enhanced unique ability, and then you'll be good to go. Because that means it'll just mark purple weapons as fodder. You can destroy those very easily as junk, and then you can kind of keep going. Because ultimately, as you get closer and closer to endgame, you're going to be focusing almost entirely on unique weapons, with the occasional exception for purples like Silly Weeper, Tamer, or Eternal Willpower. But things get a little bit more complicated when we start looking at reactors and external components, because the weapons themselves don't really have stats that you can filter out, right? Because the weapons can be re-rolled, right? You can go into Albion, you can re-roll the weapon stats. Those aren't fixed, right? You don't have those locked in, so you don't want to filter by those because you can change them manually. But currently in the state of the game, you cannot re-roll the stats on reactors, and you can't re-roll the stats on your external components. And so you do want to start filtering out the stats that drop off of those, because there are stats you may want and stats you don't want. So for reactors and for external components, there's going to be a little bit more to look at here. The top is going to be the same that we just talked about with the weapons. So this is just going to be, as long as it meets that criteria or is lower than that. So it'll default to rare tier and lower. Because I would like using stats for a filter here, I will do ultimate tier and lower, which means it will include ultimates in consideration as one of the things that it looks at. level 100 and lower, which means anything, 100 or lower, if it meets the criteria, it's good to go. And then we want to exclude any reactors that are enhanced. If you have a purple reactor that you boosted up just because it had good stats on it, you want to exclude that so it doesn't automatically mark it in case you didn't mark it as favorite. But this is kind of like the first, I hope this is the first version of this, because there are still issues with this system as it's currently implemented, but it is quite useful, especially for target farming certain reactors or external components. So it will include this as part of its logic to decide whether it should mark something as junk, but then it has another option for stats here. This is a weird translation, so like the text says unused or used. All this means is on or off. I don't know why it got translated this way, but all this setting does is that when it says unused, it will ignore whatever settings you have for stats. When it says use, it means it's on. It's now considering the stat settings that you have down here. I don't know why it got translated that way. It just does. This is off and on. That's all it is. So when we have it on, it's going to, anything that passes this filter is then also going to check this filter down here for stats. And it functions just the same as the tier and the reactor level. If it has skill cost on it, for example, it will see if it's rare or lower, which means that if you have all of these set to rare, it will filter the items out that don't have a gold version of this stat. However, there is a major problem with this in that it currently only checks one of the two stats. So if you have all of this set to purple, so say you roll like a gold skill duration up, it will not be filtered out by this, but it may also have a blue down but not out. It doesn't check both stats. And I think what they need to do long term is they need to add another option here that says force check both stats on it. So like make sure both stats meet this criteria down here. And then it becomes a lot more useful as a filter for reactors and external components. But right now it can be useful overall. In general, I think most players will probably want to run with this stat thing off and just keep this as rare so that you are just filtering out rare reactors. But if you wanted to, the way I would recommend using this is to get rid of stats you don't like at all, and also for target farming. So like if say you're going to a specific mission, if you didn't know this, you can press G in game on PC to open this up, open to your map. Then you want to go to difficulty level rewards. I don't know what this is on console, but it's F on PC. And this is going to be the reactor farm for the week. This resets just under a week's time. So it resets and you spend your time farming these. And these are super useful because it tells you where the reactors come from, the ammo type that the mount will be part of, the element that it's associated with, and what kind of subtype it's going to be: fusion, tech, dimension, singular, that sort of thing. So if you have a build in mind, then during the week, you might have a really good week for Lepic reactors or Haley reactors that you want to farm. That's when I think this system for filtration becomes really useful, because if you know you're farming specifically for a Lepic reactor, or there's like a specific reactor you want that has exact stats, what you can do is you can turn this stat on and then set all of the stats that you don't like to be ultimate and below, right? Because then if you set the stats you don't want to ultimate and below, it will always filter those out. You don't want them. So say you're looking for a toxic reactor that has tech and like toxic skill power. Then you can set everything but those two stats to ultimate or below and keep those at rare or even blue. And that way you have a very simple filtration system for target farming. And when you're farming a reactor for a specific purpose, you can keep it on like this, with this as used, with this as ultimate below, which means that the only way it will not filter through this is if it gets one of the stats that you're looking for at rare or above. Just because it'll fail that filter and not get marked as junk. You don't want to have this on all the time because there could be some really good reactors that you can swap in and use at some points. So you don't want to have this as restrictive all the time, but I think it does get useful when you're trying to target farm a specific reactor or a specific external component. And by the way, it's going to be the exact same for the external components for these stats as well. Personally, for me, I always have sub attack power on ultimate because there's no builds right now that use sub attack power as a priority stat in any way. And you could probably also put some other stats in here that you really don't like. And then I leave it on ultimate tier so that you can see that not all of these will pass. If I go like this, right? This one didn't get marked, even though it is a purple, right? So it is a purple, it's below ultimate tier, but it has a gold roll on additional skill attack. So if I were to go in here and go down to additional skill attack, was it Legion of Darkness that we just saw? If I apply that, it's now going to mark that. Hopefully that makes sense and makes it a lot clearer. Same thing goes for the external components. You will have the same stats here. I think everyone can put probably a sieve display time, a sieve search radius, and probably down but not out duration as well to ultimate and below. Those are pretty trash. The only thing I'll mention there is that there is, for Enzo Vault farming, you can run a module or an external component that does search radius. It will increase the range at which you scan for vaults. So in that specific niche case, it can be useful. But in general, you can set it to ultimate and below and kind of trash it away. And this is what I would use for like external components. You probably just want to do rare tier and below because there are some very, very good purple external components. Unlike the reactors, where you generally want to have a gold reactor if you have the option to, there are some set bonuses like Acrobat, Veteran Marksman that are very good, and they're also purple only external components. So in that case, I would leave this as rare tier below. Exclude 100, use, and then set just the couple stats you don't want, and that's where it's going to be. But once they add more options to this system, I think it can get a lot more complex and a lot more useful. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.